Presidential primaries, Trump, Cruz, and Rubio all claiming wins with more states now up for grabs. Democratic debate. Clinton and Sanders spar over jobs and the best way to help American workers. Remembering Nancy Reagan, how the White House is paying tribute. And the Pope calls them modern-day martyrs. What we're learning about nuns who were killed in Yemen and a kidnapped priest. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Monday, March 7th, 2016. Good evening on this Monday. Thanks for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. A string of weekend presidential primaries leads to mixed results. Nearly every candidate comes away with at least one win. With Donald Trump still the clear Republican frontrunner, the race for runner-up remains unsettled. Ted Cruz has more wins than Marco Rubio, but many insiders, including his fellow senators, aren't in Cruz's corner. Rubio needs a win later this month in his home state of Florida to remain a credible candidate. John Kasich says his only path to the nomination is a brokered convention where no one has enough delegates to lock up the nomination. Between the Democrats, Bernie Sanders is winning primaries in more states, but most are small compared with Hillary Clinton's big wins. So here are the results of this weekend's primaries and caucuses. Donald Trump won the most Republican delegates with victories in Kentucky and Louisiana. Ted Cruz wins in Kansas and Maine, Marco Rubio in Puerto Rico. Democrat Hillary Clinton won Louisiana, while Senator Bernie Sanders took Kansas, Nebraska, and Maine. Cruz won the Conservative Political Action Conference straw poll on Saturday. 40% of the attendees picked Cruz as their first choice for president. He criticized Donald Trump for not showing up.
So Donald Trump is skipping CPAC. I think somebody told him Megyn Kelly was going to be here. Or even worse, he was told there were conservatives that were going to be here.
Trump finished third in the CPAC straw poll behind Marco Rubio. Governor Kasich of Ohio finished fourth. CPAC represents a small but vocal conservative segment of the Republican Party. John Kasich did pick up a high-profile endorsement this weekend. Former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger compares Kasich to an action hero. The Hollywood star says when serving in Congress, Kasich was able to push through a balanced budget. Schwarzenegger used Snapchat to announce his endorsement.
I want John Kasich to be the next nominee of the Republicans and also to be the next president of the United States. Here he is.
Thank you, Arnold. Love you, man.
Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders are Democratic rivals, but they agree the Republican governor of Michigan should resign. They accuse Governor Rick Snyder of mishandling the Flint water crisis. They debated in Flint on Sunday, a city hard hit by unemployment. Sanders blames Clinton for supporting trade deals he says hurt workers. Clinton says Sanders would have made things worse since he didn't support the auto industry bailout.
Secretary Clinton supported virtually every one of these disastrous trade agreements written by corporate America. NAFTA, supported by the Secretary, cost us 800,000 jobs nationwide, tens of thousands of jobs in the Midwest.
You have to make hard choices when you're in positions of responsibility. The two senators from Michigan stood on the floor and said, we have to get this money released. I went with them, and I went with Barack Obama. You did not. If everybody had voted the way he did, I believe the auto industry would have collapsed, taking 4 million jobs with it.
Michigan and Mississippi hold primaries tomorrow. There's also a Republican caucus in Hawaii and a Republican primary in Idaho. Other stories our EWTN News Nightly team is covering in today's world. The White House was her home for 8 years, and Nancy Reagan's death Sunday is felt there today, as Lauren Ashburn reports.
Brian, the White House says Nancy Reagan's death is on the minds of everyone here. Yesterday, the president ordered the flag at half staff. When asked about her death after a meeting with financial regulators, he remembered her fondly.
I had the opportunity to meet Ms. Reagan once. Obviously, she was already advanced in age, but could not have been more gracious and more charming to myself and Michelle when we first came into office. I think it's been well documented, the extraordinary love that she had for her husband so she will be missed.
The White House is waiting for funeral arrangements to be made before deciding who from the White House will attend. In the morning, the president held meetings on the state of the economy. He invited Treasury Secretary Jack Lew and Federal Reserve Chair Janet Yellen, among others. The goal was to receive an update on Wall Street reform programs. It's been 8 years since the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. As for criticism the administration has not done enough, the president had this to say.
The laws that we passed have worked. I want to emphasize this because it is popular in the media, in political discourse, both on the left and the right, to suggest that the crisis happened and nothing changed.
They also discussed the importance of coordination to bolster cybersecurity, to make our financial system stronger and more resilient. Brian?
Lauren Ashburn, thank you. We have more tributes to Nancy Reagan coming up in a little bit. Ed Meese, the former Attorney General and close friend to the Reagan, joins us a little bit later on. An Idaho pastor who prayed at a weekend campaign rally for Ted Cruz is gunned down outside his church a day later. Pastor Tim Remington is expected to survive. He was shot as many as 6 times while leaving service Sunday at the Altar Church in Coeur d'Alene, Washington. Police say they're looking for a 30-year-old former Marine who should be considered armed and dangerous. An assistant pastor at that church says Remington has been threatened before by drug addicts he tries to help through his faith-based recovery program. Authorities in India say they'll spare no effort to rescue a Catholic priest kidnapped by terrorists in Yemen. A spokeswoman for the Missionaries of Charity confirms the priest was abducted during a deadly attack at a home for the elderly. Wyatt Goolsby is here with more.
Brian, a government official in India says they still don't know where the priest is being held at this point, but they know he was captured Friday during the same shooting that left 16 dead, including 4 nuns. On Sunday, Pope Francis reacted to the massacre.
Questi sono I martiri di oggi.
Pope Francis telling the faithful Sunday he prays for the sisters and the other victims of the attack in Yemen. He called the sisters martyrs, the Pope saying they gave their blood for the church. On Friday, gunmen posing as relatives of residents at the retirement home stormed the facility. They moved from room to room, handcuffing their victims before shooting them in the head. The Missionaries of Charity, founded by Mother Teresa, confirmed 2 of the sisters killed were from Rwanda and the other 2 were from India and Kenya. During the attack, the gunmen also kidnapped Father Tom Uzanalil. According to a report, Father Tom is a Salesian priest from India who has been serving the residents and the local parish in Yemen for several years. No one has claimed responsibility for the attack. The Missionaries of Charity also say the gunmen destroyed the chapel and residence center. The southern part of Yemen has been a haven for ISIS and al-Qaeda operatives since the outbreak of Yemen's civil war. Christians and other religious minorities are regularly targeted, according to the advocacy group In Defense of Christians. Brian?
Wyatt Goolsby, thank you. Tim Shah is Associate Director of the Religious Freedom Project at Georgetown University. Tim, knowing the tensions there in Yemen, did this attack surprise you?
No, not at all. The civil war that's been raging there now for many months has created terrible lawlessness, instability, and ISIS and al-Qaeda operatives are taking advantage of that instability and targeting religious minorities, including Christians, who have been targeted before in Yemen.
So shocking. The Missionaries of Charity would be the least likely to pose any threat to anyone.
Yes, exactly. Well, we see this pattern around the world. We see an incredibly sacrificial global church serving millions of people around the world, and often in very risky situations, and they're suffering for it. And this is another example.
Do you believe that Mother Teresa's Missionaries of Charity were specifically targeted in this?
Yes, I think there's good evidence for that. There were something like 80 residents in this home. Virtually all of the people who worked in the home, including the 4 Missionaries of Charity nuns, several volunteers from Ethiopia, and others, the people who worked in this home were all killed, or at least many of them.
So where else in the world are we seeing this relentless persecution of Christian minorities?
Well, sadly, we're seeing it in many, many places. According to a book that we helped put out at the Religious Freedom Project, something like 500 million Christians are subject to this kind of persecution around the world. Across Africa, we think of Boko Haram in northern Nigeria, across many parts of Asia, China, India, Bangladesh, Pakistan. Huge numbers of Christians, unfortunately, are facing this kind of violence.
Where does this hatred, this violence stem from, and is there any way to counter it?
Well, I think there are two factors here. One is that we do see Christians, knowing the risks, serving in very, very difficult places, like the Missionaries of Charity, faithfully serving in a context which they knew was dangerous. This happens all over the world. Christians are often the only people serving in places just like this, so that's one factor. The other factor is just the lack of religious freedom in the world. We know from a lot of research that countries that lack religious freedom are more likely to see groups that suffer persecution react with violence. The Shiite Houthis in Yemen have suffered disenfranchisement, marginalization, persecution by the Sunni majority government, and they've reacted with violence, unfortunately. And that often creates contexts of instability and violence where these things can happen.
Shocking and tragic. Tim Shah, thanks for joining us and for your perspective.
My pleasure, Brian.
Well, North Korea threatens nuclear strikes on the U.S. and South Korea. The warning comes as the U.S. and South Korea begin large-scale military exercises today. These annual drills are invasion rehearsals in the event of war. They don't sit well with North Korea. Analysts say North Korea's traditional anger over these drills forces the South to respond with its own costly war games. Pyongyang warns it could launch a preemptive nuclear strike. A U.S. drone strike on a training site in Somalia kills as many as 150 suspected al-Shabaab fighters. The Pentagon says they were in the final stages of preparing a large-scale attack. The military did not say where the attack might happen. It believes the fighters posed an imminent threat to U.S. troops and African peacekeeping forces. And Turkey demands more money from the European Union to help deal with the surge of Syrian refugees. World leaders gathered today in Brussels talking about the ongoing humanitarian crisis. Nearly 3 million people have fled to Turkey, trying to avoid the civil war in Syria. And Catholic groups play a key role in helping to integrate immigrants arriving legally in Europe. From Rome, Mary Shovlain profiles one group working closely with the Italian government.
A group of 93 Syrian refugees arrived in Rome from Beirut. Instead of a dangerous sea crossing on flimsy boats or walking for days to cross a border, they land safely at Rome's Fiumicino airport on a commercial flight. Italy's foreign minister, who welcomed the refugees, is hailing the arrival as a model for other countries to follow.
We need humanitarian corridors, because if this message will be extended, I think we can have a safe way to reduce the illegal migration.
Humanitarian Corridors is the brainchild of the Sant'Egidio community, a lay Catholic group, and Italy's evangelical churches. The president of Sant'Egidio says time is running out.
European response is not enough at this moment. We have too many people waiting for welcome and for integration. These people that they arrived today in Rome will be integrated in the next months.
The refugees were living in Lebanon after fleeing Syria's civil war. They were granted humanitarian visas. 93 refugees on this flight, all of them hoping for a better future.
I saw a lot of good people today, and I think it will be a good journey for me to start my career here and have a new future.
In Rome, Mary Shovlain, EWTN News Nightly.
Coming up, soon to be Saint Mother Teresa when the Pope will sign a decree. And memories of Nancy Reagan. Family friend Ed Meese shares his thoughts on the former First Lady. Today we celebrate Saints Perpetua and Felicity and their companions martyred in the early 3rd century. Perpetua was a young, noble mother. Felicity, a slave imprisoned with her, gave birth just before her own martyrdom. Saints Perpetua and Felicity, pray for us. Thanks for joining us this Monday evening, March the 8th. I'm Brian Patrick. Next week, Pope Francis will sign a decree of canonization for Blessed Mother Teresa of Calcutta. The Holy Father may also announce her canonization date. It's widely expected to be September 4th, the 19th anniversary of her death. Pope Francis will also sign the decree for Giuseppe Gabriele del Rosario Bracero, the first Argentine saint. Pope Francis leaves Rome for a week-long spiritual retreat. He's taking time for prayer, meditation, and adoration during Lent. This usually happens the first week in Lent, but was delayed due to the Pope's trip to Mexico. The Holy Father returns to the Vatican on Friday. Respect for former First Lady Nancy Reagan crosses the political aisle tonight. She enjoyed her own acting career as Nancy Davis before marrying Ronald Reagan in 1952.
It was a blind date, and I knew right away. Took him a little bit longer.
Nancy Reagan is remembered for her role in a great American love story, a marriage that brought the glamour of Hollywood to the White House. She died of congestive heart failure Sunday at her home in Los Angeles. She was 94, and mourners are leaving flowers at a makeshift memorial outside the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library.
I think she was one of the best first ladies we've ever had, and my goodness, 94 years old. That's a long time to live. Bless her heart. I'm glad they're together again.
It's just sad to see her go. I know she was getting older, and everybody has their time, and she's lived a good long life, and I'm just out here to pay respects for her passing.
The White House released this statement. Our former First Lady redefined the role in her time here. Later, in her long goodbye with President Reagan, she became a voice on behalf of millions of families going through the depleting, aching reality of Alzheimer's. Tributes are crossing party lines. Ted Cruz, Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders, all tweeting condolences. Mrs. Reagan will be buried next to her husband at his presidential library in California. Ed Meese was the U.S. Attorney General during the Reagan administration, a longtime friend of the Reagan family. We extend our sympathy to you, Ed, and the loss of your loved one. Tell us a little bit about Nancy Reagan in these past dozen years or so. The last time we really saw much of her was at the state funeral of her husband.
Yes, she has been reasonably active for several years. Lately, of course, her health and her general age has limited her movements and activities, but for most of the last decade, she's been meeting with friends from time to time, also keeping an eye on what's going on at the Reagan Library, which is one of her very important things that she was so instrumental in having it built and having it properly set to carry on Ronald Reagan's legacy. So she's been active, but of course in the last few years, her mobility is much limited, and her health has been failing, unfortunately.
During her 52 years of marriage to Ronald Reagan, of course, she was with him at the state mansion in California, at the White House here in Washington, D.C. She was said to be very protective of her husband. In what way?
Well, I think she was protective, particularly to make sure that as president, well, as governor too, but that he had adequate rest, that he was eating healthily and doing those things. And I think also she had an instinct of what people and what situations might be harmful to him, and she was able to pass those on to him as any good wife would.
She was very classy. The Reagan White House had a class that has really hasn't happened since then, I would think. But how much say did she have? People said that she had more say than the president sometimes.
No, that's absolutely false.
That's not true.
Ronald Reagan made the decisions. As any good wife, I'm sure she gave him ideas at home, but I never saw her interfering in policy matters or things that really weren't her concern. And as I say, she may well have given him ideas at home. I know my wife does that for me. But in terms of interfering in the functions of state, no.
President Reagan was very firm in his faith, quietly firm. How did Nancy Reagan, how was she part of that?
Well, he loved her very much, and I'm sure that he talked with her about matters of faith. And while I don't know particularly, because I've never had the opportunity to discuss it with her, I'm sure that, at least in part, I would think that she shared that strong faith that he had. I would certainly hope so.
Nancy Reagan will no doubt leave a legacy. What do you believe that is?
I think her legacy will be as one of the outstanding first ladies in history, as well as a great example of a good wife who supported and encouraged her husband to do great things.
She, of course, had a very successful acting career before meeting Ronald Reagan.
Right. Right. And I think when she gave that up, she gave it up to help him and to be a good wife to him, and she certainly was that. And also, I think she was a good example to a number of people. Her program in combating drugs, her Don't Say No program, undoubtedly was instrumental in saving the lives of hundreds of thousands of young people by helping to decrease drug use during that decade that Ronald Reagan was influential in that matter by over 50% in our country. So I think in that regard, she was very instrumental.
She will be remembered for Just Say No, I'm sure. Ed Meese, the former Attorney General with the Reagan administration, thank you so much for sharing the memories of your dear friend.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Nancy Reagan's visitation and funeral will be held at the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. Her body will lie in repose for public visitation on Wednesday and Thursday. Her private funeral and internment at the Reagan Library, next to her late husband, is on Friday. Former President Jimmy Carter, now cancer-free for several months, says he no longer needs treatment. The 91-year-old Carter shared the news during a Sunday school class he teaches. The 39th president had an aggressive form of melanoma that spread to his liver and brain. He was initially declared cancer-free in December. Carter will continue to be tested and will resume treatment if needed. Up next, bishops across the Americas unite, what they're saying about a recent meeting following the Pope's trip to Mexico. And a challenging race across Alaska. See the start of the Iditarod. Members of EWTN's Alabama staff performed corporal works of mercy, sheltering the homeless this past weekend. They insulated a Habitat for Humanity house, worked on the roof, built a deck, and much more, all part of the Jubilee Year of Mercy. Thanks for joining us this evening. I'm Brian Patrick. The U.S. Supreme Court today reverses an Alabama Supreme Court decision to refuse to recognize a same-sex parent adoption from Georgia. The High Court states, quote, "A state may not disregard the judgment of a sister state because it disagrees with the reasoning underlying the judgment or deems it to be wrong on the merits." Bishops from across the U.S., Canada, and Latin America show the unity of the church in the Western Hemisphere. Their recent gathering in Florida comes shortly after Pope Francis's trip to Mexico. Louisville Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, president of the USCCB, joining us by Skype tonight. Your Excellency, thanks for being with us.
Brian, thanks for having me on.
Share your prayer, if you would, after meeting with your brother bishops from the U.S., Canada, and Latin America.
Well, it was a real act of communio, as our Holy Father would say. And so I pray that as I looked across the table and see brother bishops, that we will together be joined closer to Christ and closer to one another as we seek to lead the faithful.
What did you learn from the time that you spent with them?
Well, of course, there's great diversity within the Americas, and yet we have the commonality of Christ. We are all called to be missionary disciples, and that came through very well. Believe it or not, the biggest common thread was our celebration of the Year of Mercy together.
So in this world where diversity often leads to debate and controversy, it seems like the church is really the tool that really brings people together in that common ground of Christ. Was that your experience?
Well, you're right. And let's face it, debate is, if done in a civil way, is a very good thing. But we as a church know that debate that does not lead to real dialogue usually goes in circles. And so seeing the human person, seeing people who are involved, as Pope Francis said, leads us to, as you said, debates and differences, but leading us to a real commonality and to a dialogue based on the common good.
Your Excellency, these meetings have been going on for decades. Have they taken on a bit of a new life now that we have a Holy Father from Latin America?
Well, they sure have, Brian. Not only is our Holy Father someone whose roots are in South America, but he has had involvement. The Salem gathering of Aparecida in 2007, he was directly involved in the bringing together of that document. So his presence as our Holy Father has only brought us together even more throughout the Americas.
Archbishop Joseph Kurtz, we appreciate you joining us from Louisville by Skype. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brian.
And they're off. 85 mushers begin the trek to conquer Alaska's daunting Iditarod dog sled course. The race began Sunday across some of the United States' toughest terrain. This year's winner is expected to complete the race in about 9 days. The racers and their dog teams face 2 mountain ranges, the Yukon River, and fierce sea winds. Until tomorrow, for the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We leave you tonight enjoying God's artwork, a spectacular image of the Aurora Borealis, this picture of the Northern Lights taken in Ireland. Good night. God bless you.